don't know, my name is Annette Lagunas. I'm the Executive Director here at the Humane Society of Yuma. And thank you all for being here. I am so happy to see all of your faces. I think this is going to be a great presentation, and the Humane Society is truly blessed to have all these ladies here with us this week. I've been getting a lot of information, so my brain's a little full. But I just really quickly wanted you to, for those of you who may not know, some of our board members are in the room tonight. So Claire Eckerd, our board president, is here. We've got David McCone, our board vice president. Wendy McKay, our board secretary. Bernadette Presloy, board member. Athena Godwin, our newest board member. So thank you so much for being here today. This is Dr. Sarah Pizano, and she is with Team USA, TeamShelter USA. Is that right?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So I'm going to let her introduce everybody because I'll be up here and make a mess of it. So there you go. Oh, and we're on Facebook Live for all of you to watch this later. So
yes. So
thank you.
Thank you, Annette. If you have people that were interested in coming but they couldn't make it, you can get the link and share it with them. Okay. So my name is Dr. Sarah Pizano, and I'm also over the assessment program at the University of Florida. And with that, we bring veterinarians, could be students, faculty, interns, residents, all different types of people interested in funders who are also here, and other organizations that want to learn how we do assessments. So Cameron Moore is from the University of Florida team and my assessment team member for many years. And I wanted to introduce our team that's here this week. We're so excited from Midwestern, your veterinary school that's very close to you here. So I wanted everybody to introduce themselves.
Dr. Hillary Harrington on the shelter medicine team at Midwestern.
Great. Dr. Rachel Chrysler, also shelter medicine team.
Dr. Nancy Bradley, shelter medicine.
Hi, I'm Kathy Overfield, and I'm with the Boston Medical Society.
I'm Jennifer Atkins, and I'm also from Best Friends Animal Society.
And Cameron Moore again, non-veterinarian.
Yeah, so can everybody say happy birthday to Kathy? She was going to celebrate at lunch, but then they didn't have the hats, and we couldn't embarrass her, so we wanted to embarrass her here. Excellent. Thank you. Great. Thanks, you guys. We're so happy. We're so happy you're here. So for those of you on social media, please thank the University of Florida because we are an expensive assessment team. We work all over the United States, and this assessment was awarded to the Humane Society in your community pro bono. So please give a shout out to the University of Florida however you can, and thank them for this assessment. Sorry, my iPad is full, so I hope this isn't. I tried to hide it. Hold on a second. And so, just move it down. Oh, it keeps popping up. Okay, sorry about that. And now we seem to be having.
It all worked a little bit ago, we
It
promise.
Technical difficulty.
All right.
That's how it always works.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Works fine if you need it.
Yeah.
You saw it work, right?
Always check the cord.
I know it's wireless, though. That used to work. I am not sure why it's not working now.
Angel to the rescue.
Angel to the rescue, yes.
He can fix anything.
So, here, hold on. I turned it off. This is my IT genius. I turn it off, and then I turn it on. That's it.
Yay.
That's it. Isn't that crazy? It just worked. Okay, I'll just do it. I'll just have to do it.
Could the battery be dead on the pointer thingy?
No, I don't know. I mean, it literally just worked. There we go.
Yay.
Yeah, but anyway, okay. All right, so I want to just know who's in the room because this is my reminder to tell you to remember that we are all holding a piece of this puzzle, are we not? Sometimes we're holding a little piece, sometimes we're holding a big piece. Maybe we have time, maybe we have more money than time, but at even different seasons of our life that may change, but we are all pieces of this puzzle. And the more productively, respectfully, and collaboratively we work together, the more animals are helped. So I want to find out who's in the room, and thank you so much to your board members for coming this evening. And how many shelter staff do we have? Awesome. How many volunteers? And rescue groups, maybe from another organization, another nonprofit? Awesome. Any other categories of people that are here?
Veterinary clinic.
Veterinary clinics. Excellent.
Unelected. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Great. Anybody else? Perfect. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. So to make sure we're all on the same page, we spend a lot of time worrying about animals in shelters, do we not? We obsess about animals in shelters. We get gray hairs because of animals in shelters. But really what we want is all our pets to live like this. Of course, my cat and dog. The bed in the kitchen that you trip over. This is what we want, and this is our common denominator. So I'm going to ask you to maybe just listen to some of these ideas that might seem to be fairly new philosophies or ways for you to look at the same issues and look at it from a different perspective. And we have a very unique, I think, view of what's happening in animal welfare. Cameron and I have been doing assessments since 2013, so over 100 assessments, and all open admission public shelters, some private organizations like yours with the municipal contracts. And what we found is even though everywhere we went, people say, oh, we're different here. And people say, but you don't understand, we're different here. And so we have this global perspective, right? So we're saying, that's funny, because that's what they said in Georgia, and that's what they said in Texas, and that's what they said in Iowa. Every one of us that are in animal welfare, working in shelters, I promise you, we share the same challenges. The best news in the 30 plus years that I've been in animal welfare is, guess what? The solutions are also the same. But we have to get off of this broken system, this treadmill, if you will, of this broken animal welfare, animal control, animal sheltering system that we have tried so desperately to work within and suffered through. We can tell you that even shelters that are more rural, more urban, higher poverty rates than yours, lower poverty rates, these best practices ring true for every single shelter and shelter type and every single community. And we didn't make this up. So you can go on any of the websites, you can watch all the webinars. We're all saying the same core principles. The only difference is your latitude and longitude. But this is really good news, because I can promise you 25 years ago, as I just stood there in my open admission shelter and watched the intake go from 28,000 to 37,000 in 6 years, how is this ever? How is this ever going to get better? How are we ever going to get out of this if animals keep flooding in? And I'm so excited to say to you today, we have figured it out, and we can make a difference, and we can productively decrease intake, because we've helped animals and we've helped pet owners, but just in ways that we're not used to doing, perhaps different than just taking them into the shelter. And that's what we mean when we say productively decreasing intake. This is not about turning animals away or not providing a service. This is about helping animals and pet owners in a different way, working smarter, not harder. Holy cow. That is a big thing in animal welfare in public and private shelters. We identify an enormous amount of wasteful practices, mind you, all with the best intentions, right? Because we thought that was the right thing to do. But we now know that we can work more efficiently. If animals animals do enter the shelter, this better be like the Ritz-Carlton. I get some room service, I get a spa treatment, I got a comfy bed, I got a soft blanket, right to a positive outcome, eliminating waste. And then what happens? Euthanasia is true euthanasia. Dangerous dogs, medical cases beyond hope. That's the euthanasia pool. Conventionally today, that means over a 90% life outcome. And so as we move forward, that's true. That might change, right, as our communities mature even more than they are now. But for now, that is a benchmark. And again, even large shelters are achieving that. So we can promise you that it's possible. And so just to show you some really what we think is remarkable when we look at some samples of communities that we've helped in our very first assessment and back in 2013 was Waco, Texas, with a 30% poverty rate. But who's thinking about Chip and JoJo right now? Fixer-upper and fixer-upper fans here with me. Thank you. So this was even before the silos. It was before they were on HGTV. That shelter was saving only 36% of the animals. A very sad situation there. And we went in and said, here, let us help you set this foundation, right? And that's what happened. And within a year, they were over 90%. Campbell County, Kentucky, another beautiful example. Murray County, Georgia, a really rural county in Georgia, 50 to 90% within the first year. I'm going to talk about Anderson separately. Huntsville, Alabama. So we have so many examples of this happening, not in years, not 5 or 10 years from now, but immediately. So we looked at just 18 of those shelters and looked at the euthanasia numbers from the year before and the year after the assessment when we helped try to set this foundation up for success. And we decreased euthanasia by almost 50,000 animals. That's just 18 shelters. Now remember, some of that is a function of decreasing shelter intake, but almost 50,000 euthanasias. So this is to capture your attention, because what you're going to be looking at and hearing about tonight is, again, not the conventional way that we've been looking at how we do animal sheltering. And this is my reminder to you and me that we all have our own experiences, our own knowledge base, right? So my mom was a nurse, and she told me in the 50s, if you had a lung problem, doctors would prescribe smoking, and you got to inhale, get that nicotine deep in your alveoli, right? So this is an actual advertisement from back then. So that's what the conventional wisdom was, right? So fast forward to 2019, do we have data? Do we have studies? Do we have a lot of deceased people that are linked with smoking? Of course we do. And now we laugh at this, and oh my gosh, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. But I can promise you, in animal welfare, we're still smoking. Now remember, back then, even 20 years ago, we didn't even have data. We don't know how many animals are going in. I mean, what kind of sector is it that says, we think between 10 and 20 million animals go into shelters a year, right? We didn't have data. Now we have data. Now we have fancy research studies. We have lots of successful programs proving that the conventional wisdom and those conventional things that we used to believe was the right thing to do, we now know that we should think differently and we need to stop smoking. This is the perfect analogy, but we're sometimes so afraid. I should have been a social psych. I might go back and get a psychology degree now, because this is a lot about our fear of a negative outcome, is it not? I'm not going to adopt to that person because I'm afraid something's going to happen. I don't want to change this program because I'm afraid somebody's going to complain. I'm afraid they're going to then dump the dog. So we have these fears, and sometimes they're rational, but here's what we know now. A lot of our fears are unfounded, and we're going to talk about that too. So all of these best practices, what we did was put it in a playbook that has a lot of the detailed reasons why we make these recommendations, and I'm really excited to tell you that it is literally at the printer now, and it's going to be launched at Expo, the National Humane Society Conference next month. So we'll be letting Annette know how to access the playbook, but again, it's all shared best practices, lots of successful programs and examples and all the data and things like that. So it's exciting to come to you and not say something like, hey, Yuma, we'd like you to try this crazy program. We're not really sure if it's going to work here, but we'd like you to try it. We can come to you and say, it will work here, and we guarantee that it will work here. We want to help you set this foundation up for success. Remember, 90% is one metric that we look at, but there are many more, are there not? How are the animals treated when they're in the shelter? Are the dogs getting exercise? Like, I was able to be part of the small dog play group today, which is really fun, right? Like, what's happening in the shelter? How are we trying to get them out of the shelter? What's our length of stay once they enter the shelter? And we are equal opportunity dogs and cats. Sometimes at the end of this presentation, people say, that's great, but what about the dogs? But cats have it worse in shelters. So we probably talk about cats and advocate for cats more than we do for dogs because they're in such crisis. But this is an equal opportunity best practice presentation, and the data I'm going to show you is from open admission shelters. So if you're not familiar with the national organizations, Best Friends, we're so happy that they're joining us here. Million Cat Challenge, has everybody heard? Who has not heard about the Million Cat Challenge? So Million Cat is an amazing, you can go on the website, millioncatchallenge.org. Brainchild of Dr. Kate Hurley at the University of California, Davis, and Dr. Levy at the University of Florida. And they said, there's this homeless sector initiative for people, and they said they were going to decrease, not homeless, I'm sorry, hospital deaths, like accidental hospital deaths. We think we can decrease hospital deaths by X number in X number of years. And so Drs. Levy and Hurley extrapolated that philosophy and said, we think if we just tell people about these 5 simple initiatives, very simple things to do, we think we can save 1 million cats in 5 years. We did not save 1 million cats in 5 years. We saved 1,148,000 cats in 3.5 years. 5 simple initiatives that everybody could do, right? So really amazing social change organization. ASPCA Pro, another national organization, and some other ones up there that you can look at webinars, amazing webinars constantly, so you can learn and go dive deeper at any time you want. The Anderson County, South Carolina story is so important, and this is such an important message for you all. The whole bar is shelter intake. This is 2013 for those of you in the back. The green, and you don't have to worry about the numbers, what you need to see is the percentages. The green is live outcome, and the blue is euthanasia. So did we not? We thought, oh, we're going to help Anderson. Every year we have to save this many animals. We always thought, we have so many animals in the shelter and intake is going up. We have to save all those animals. That's not true. We need to productively decrease intake. Oh, this is nice. Nice trends, intake going down. Nice trends, intake going up. But what happened here was the miracle. This year, 3 months, almost at the end of 2016, there was a new director, and we happened to be there for an assessment. And she was hungry to implement best practices. She had worked in a shelter, but she wasn't a director before. And so we said, we're going to stand alongside you. We want you to do this, 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 and this. And within 3 months, with no increase in budget, very important, no increase in budget, no increase in shelter space, and no increase in the number of staff, Dr. Kim Sanders took that shelter from a 50% live outcome to over 90%. gives me chills thinking about it. And how many of us is, oh, it's going to take many, many years. It's going to take millions of dollars. We don't have enough. We don't have enough of whatever. We have this scarcity mentality. We need to look at what we have and use it strategically. This is a really important story. So Dr. Sanders now helps a lot of other shelters in South Carolina and came with us on an assessment in Ohio. And their shelter was exactly the same, 50% live outcome. And she came to say, hey, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I understand your challenges. Let me show you how we did it and how we were able to accomplish that, because you can do the same thing. Waco, Texas, as you know, 30% poverty rate. So beautiful. This is where we started in 2012. So here, every year, same thing happening, same results. And immediately there was a decrease in shelter intake. So just appreciate these trends of decreasing shelter intake is amazing. And then of course, euthanasia tracks alongside of that. Campbell County, Kentucky, I'm showing you this because of the trend of decreasing intake and increasing live outcome at the same time, right? So I feel like we're almost cheating, right, to get to 90% because it's a function of decreasing intake. And we do know that for dogs in 2018, you are over 90%. For cats, you are lower, but you're better this fiscal year, this calendar year. But last year, about 65%. So there's still room and lots of opportunities that we're talking to you all about improving. So responsible public policy means that my public policy is serving as it should to protect animals and people, right? But what happens over time and what happened without data, without studies, without trends, is all these global laws and ordinances were created, again, with good intentions, but without data. So many of these ordinances have handcuffed shelters. We always look at the public policy in an area, so we have looked at your municipal ordinances, and that has set us up with meetings with all of your municipalities, and we met with the county today. We look at, are there barriers to live outcome? And that means something as simple as, are we really trying to reunite a pet with their owner? Or for a random stray dog, not an enforcement or bite or dangerous dog or anything like that, but a random stray dog, why are we charging X, Y, Z, and we're putting all these barriers up to live outcome? Why don't we incentivize, like the Humane Society does incentivize, and get them spay-neutered so we help them become a responsible pet owner? So this is a big area of focus, and we did talk to the county today about some changes. But it is the framework for an organization, and you might say, well, we're the Humane Society, we don't have control over, that's not our responsibility. Well, it is absolutely your responsibility for any of you in any organization, because it affects everything that happens in this shelter and before animals come into this shelter and how they get out of the shelter. It affects everything. So this really does matter to every shelter, every rescue group. And we just want to make sure that they're all in line with best practices. So we have to think about what come on. Do this. So we have to think about what is important to our civic leaders, right? So we're not going to go into a meeting and go talk to your council people with the cat ears and the tail and, talking about saving all the cats and dogs, right? Because that's typically not their number one priority. They are in that position for two reasons: to make sure there's fiscal responsibility, make sure there's constituent services, and you better believe, make sure the constituents are happy, right? So this has historically meant that we do whatever the people say. So how come I can't go to the the DMV and say, I want you to open on Sunday at 1 p.m. I want you to come tow my car. We don't do that, right? But we sure do that with animal control. And so we need to have our elected officials educated about an efficient system that serves the public in a better way. That's what we tell them, and that's true. But for us, the benefit is it's life-saving. And it keeps animals out of shelters, and it keeps pets with their in their homes. But holy cow, every one of us, regardless of what organization you're with, the way that you establish what you want in your communities is to work together. And so a lot of times there's public policy that might be proposed, and the elected officials don't know what to do because animal welfare group number 1 is saying this, and animal welfare group number 2 is saying that, and they don't know what to do, right? So we have to be a unified voice in the interest of the best practices, always driven by data, and we have yet to be surprised by data we found at the shelters. Most of the data and trends are in line with national trends. So we could say, that's pretty typical, so that's okay, you're normal, we want to help you change that, but this is what's happening. And this means looking at your stray holds. We always look at your state law. We're very happy, in fact, with your state law, especially a part of your state law that allows for the sterilization and return of a cat to its original location, and in lieu of the stray hold, so that's amazing. And we've changed ordinances all over the country. I guess I'll have her. Oh, okay. Was it 1?
That's when it went to.
Yeah, I think it skipped a bunch. Let's say, yeah. Okay. Right, and so the Humane Society of Yuma, we love this setup because you already have these public-private partnerships in place, which are the most powerful because you have the ability then to capitalize on the strengths of all the organizations, right? So you have municipalities that have a reach in the social sector that you don't have as a nonprofit, yet you have more autonomy. So you can raise money in different ways, in easier ways, and accept donations and all those things. And so we love that, and we were so happy to be meeting with the municipalities to tell them that this is a great setup. And coalitions can mean anything, so any number of organizations. So in Northern Kentucky, we created a program where this very wealthy cat foundation, the Joni Bernard Foundation, wanted to fund spay-neuter in Northern Kentucky, but there was not an organization large enough for them to give a grant. So, no, that was it. End of story, period. Then you had this incredible need. They couldn't give to government shelters directly, where only 22% of the cats in one shelter were saved, and another one, 36% of the cats were saved. So are you kidding me? You have a rich foundation and you have all this needs. You better figure out a way to get that gap closed. And so we were able to do that by approaching the social, there's area development districts, they're called, and that's all of the state of Kentucky is divided into those districts of 8 to 16, 17 counties, and they have a nonprofit arm. So a $500,000 grant went to that arm. Guess what? They had never done anything in animal welfare, right? So don't forget, go to these corporations, go to these organizations, even if they've never funded animal welfare. I can promise you, in every large company, there are lots of animal lovers and lots of leaders in those companies, and they just don't know what to do. So you need to give them a project and give them something to fund. In Watershed Animal Foundation, they're based in Oklahoma, but they just gave $1.2 million. That's just another Kentucky example. This PetSmart Charities grant for Greater Cincinnati, that was 7 organizations or so that had never met before we did the assessment, and they started working together, and a year later they got a coalition grant that they would not have received for over $100,000. The only reason they got it is because they worked together. So we would encourage you to always look for these ways and opportunities to work together in a coalition. And we ended euthanasia in all of northern Kentucky in 8 counties. So 2017 ended euthanasia as population control. So really, really amazing. So all of our organizations, regardless of who you are, public or private, you have a finite pool of money, a pie, if you will. This is about whatever your pie is, using it strategically. You can be so much more impactful if you think about targeting high-risk groups. And this means who is at risk of coming in the shelter. Number one is we know, we have studies that show most of the animals entering our shelters, doesn't matter public or private, are from fixed income pet owners, and of course they're intact, and it is not because those owners don't want to sterilize. This is about access. They don't have the access, even if it's low cost, like $70 or $80. The tipping point appears to be about $20 all in. So fixed income pet owners, we don't have a lot of data on an exact formula, but Peter Marsh has done research around that formula, and he recommends 5 to 10 of those subsidized surgeries per 1,000 people in your community. So if you look at your whole county. And then of course your high intake areas. This is crucial. You have a limited pie and a limited piece for spay-neuter, for community programs. So we don't want to say, hey, Yuma County, free spay-neuter to whoever comes first. No, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure we're targeting the fixed income high risk because they're more likely to surrender pets to the shelter. And then where are geographically my high intake areas of dogs or cats, not zip codes, but what areas, and that's where we're going to target our resources for spay-neuter in particular and other services. And then of course our large breed dogs, right? Because they have gargantuan litters, they're less likely to be sterilized, they're exponentially harder to save if they enter the shelter, right? So that is a crucial target group. And then community cats are so special, we're going to talk about them separately. But here's Jacksonville, Florida. This graph shows targeted spay-neuter, going up 1 year to over 32,000 targeted spay-neuters in that community. And this is intake at the 2 shelters, public and private, and euthanasia. So there's a direct inverse correlation when you hit these target numbers. And when I say targeted in Jacksonville, this is a combination of fixed income, so no cost, community cats, middle income, so some low cost, so it's a blend of those things. So look at that graph in Jacksonville, Florida, and look at Waco, Texas. You could just overlay those graphs, could you not? It's the same exact trends. What did Waco say when we started? We're too far here, it's never gonna work. Yeah, it is. Because that's exactly why it's gonna work, right? It might even work faster in your community. But all of these have one thing in common, along with what Huntsville has in common with Waco and Jacksonville, like we were talking about with the municipalities today. These all happen because of public-private money. So these municipalities said, oh, wait a minute, I think you got something here. You're decreasing shelter intake. So they do reserve money to work with their nonprofits. So this is public and private money, and that's really important. The reason I'm showing you Huntsville, though, is you have capacity here. Right now, the Humane Society is the only high volume, right, spay-neuter clinic in your area. So Huntsville, too, has not been able to get a high volume spay-neuter clinic going. So these surgeries were all done by a network of private veterinarians. And this is a really important way that we need to focus on closing this gap between private practitioners and shelters because there is a great disconnect. But what a nice opportunity to partner with our private veterinarians, make sure they're subsidized where they need to be subsidized. They are for profit. So the Humane Society surgeries can be done cheaper. That's because you're a nonprofit and you're subsidized. So remembering when you're looking at funding and working with private veterinarians, they have to be subsidized at a different level. But look what happened in Huntsville. And is it me or is it really hot in here?
It's on.
Can we turn the air down a little bit?
We're not supposed to.
No?
We'll work on it.
We are in Arizona.
Yes,
And I live
we
in
are.
Florida. If I'm saying it's hot, it must be really hot. So Huntsville, so look at this. Intake 10,000 down to 5,000, right? So it took them a little longer, right? Because they didn't have the high surgery numbers. But amazing, amazing. We talked a lot about this with the municipalities, community-minded enforcement. Why am I going to give somebody a $300 citation and take their dog because it's at large and put them in the shelter? Like, what good does that do anybody? They're not going to be able to get their dog back, nor did they deserve a punitive reaction to that. Perhaps they needed education. Perhaps they needed something else. So in Santa Cruz, these guys said, we are so tired of going into these high intake areas over and over. We're going to dumb it down once a week. We're going to take off all our fancy animal control gear and attire, and we're not going to look scary. We're going to have polos on. We sure are going to have stickers for the kids. Thank you, Angela. We're going to have stickers for the kids because everybody knows if you talk to kids and ask them questions and you give them a deputy sticker, they spill the beans and they tell you everything. So that's what they did, you know, and they would find out what people needed. They said to their community, we need donations. All of this was done by donations, in-kind services. They got dog houses donated, leashes and collars, all different kinds of things. And they turned their high intake areas into their low intake areas. So now when animal control goes into those communities, the kids and everybody's like, oh, it's animal control, we're so happy to see you. Instead of everybody running in their house and pulling the shades down and turning off the lights, right? Because we're adversarial. So this is about building a partnership, and it's really, and we did talk about to your municipalities about that. But herein lies the visual I have for you on the broken system that we call animal control and sheltering, or animal welfare. We make it really easy for people to leave animals in shelters, do we not? No appointments, maybe we'll charge you $20. We're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We might even come pick up your pet if you say you want to surrender them. And then to get them out, it might be a 5-day hold, it might be $100, it might be more expensive, I might have to do yada yada, then I gotta sterilize them. You get the picture, right? So it's no money or little money to get them in, as an example, and really expensive to get them out. How does this serve animals? It doesn't. Because entering a shelter is number one, scary. Number two, they're at risk of infectious disease, overcrowding, and as best we do, we work so hard to keep them comfortable. This is not a home, right? This is not what's best for them. We're doing our best on caring for them, but we want to think about what can we do out here so that we reserve this very precious shelter space, finite shelter space, for only those animals that have no other options, and then we're going to make it really easy to get them to that positive life outcome. So again, I can't re-emphasize this. This is about helping pet owners. This is not about turning them away, and that's something we repeat a lot, especially for our municipal leaders, because sometimes they hear, oh, you're closing the door, oh, you're not going to help, and no, that we're going to say, what do you need? What can we do for you? How can we help you? How can we help you keep your pet or place your pet directly so they don't have to come to the shelter? And our best example, I would say a good surrender prevention safety net program, you decrease owner surrenders by about 30%. That's reason to pop champagne. That's amazing. What do our intake staff say? It's never gonna work here. Nobody ever cares, nobody wants to do that. Well, we have to say, remember our brains, our human brains, default to negative, emphasize negative. It's some fight or flight thing, I guess from the caveman era, right? And that means that the positives are minimized. So the first thing we think about is that person who was not nice and dropped the pet off and seemed like they didn't care, right? So that's what we think about. But what happened in Brevard County? No increase in staff, no increase in shelter space, no increase in budget. What can I do for you to help you keep your pet or place your pet? Year one, 80% of the cats and 80% of the dogs were helped outside the shelter, never had to enter the shelter. Are you kidding me? I was like, you did? Cameron and I were like, you did what? We were like, oh yeah, we knew that was gonna happen. Not, I mean, that's amazing, right? But it shows you when you work in partnership with people, most people don't want to surrender. They just didn't have access to those resources. And I told you this story instead of I messed up my stories. This is the Brevard County story that I just told you. The other one was about the most recent ASPCA study that showed most people don't want to surrender. They just needed access to some sort of temporary care. And I know there's people in this room that are just like I was, judging those people who left their pets in the shelter, right? So we know differently now, we need to do differently. In Jacksonville, what happened, I talk about Jacksonville a lot because that's how our Target Zero started back in 2012, 13, and Cameron was there for 6 years, so we have a lot of data from Jacksonville, and what an amazing bright spot. But remember that graph I showed you way back when they were euthanizing most of the animals. They've been over 90% for many years now, and this is a shelter that has all bully breeds. Dog-wise, you don't see anybody with hair, longer than this in their shelter, all bully breeds. And they're in the mid-90s with respect to live outcome. But guess what? They're not eating bonbons. It doesn't get easy once you get over 90%. It's still hard. So animals were flooding in the shelter, and they said to their community, we want you to help us stay over 90%. Can anybody foster? Can anybody foster? Crickets, crickets, crickets. They couldn't get enough fosters. About 300, 400 animals were going to foster care a year. Then at intake, they said to the Good Samaritans, we're so crowded, we don't want to have to euthanize animals for space. Is there any way you could foster these babies? We'll do the spay neuter. We'll set up the appointments right now. We're going to vaccinate them. Can you foster them? And that turned into over 3,000 pets in foster care a year. Now, mind you, Jacksonville is a live outcome machine, right? So this doesn't mean they go to foster care and get stuck for years. This means they come back when they're ready, they get sterilized, they go to their live outcome, and they are in their new home in time for dinner. So they also thought about how could we get even more out. So for those that said, no, I would love to help, but I can't, then what they did was on the way to adoptions for dogs or cats, respectively, they would have those babies that needed to be fostered. So I'm walking to adopt a cat, but these kittens are here. Hey, I know you're here to adopt, but could you be a foster parent? And they turned those potential adopters into fosters, and then they can pick their own babies, and you see the story, right? So you see how it's thinking differently about how we're engaging our community and how we're recruiting volunteers, especially fosters. In Nashville, they decreased owner surrenders. You know what? This is not Nashville, Cameron. This is Memphis. We just travel too much. This is Memphis. So Memphis started it. They started a skip the shelter program, and first year 30%, which is amazing still, right? I mean, it's not 80, but 30 is amazing when you think about it. And again, Maddie's survey showed what we already should have known. Open admission shelters need the most help. Yeah, we know that. But the least likely to ask for help, from those Good Samaritans or the public. Why? We don't want anyone to know there's a risk of euthanasia. So we're hiding behind this veil of shame and secrecy. We don't want people to know. And we've been in communities, in fact, it was Greenville, South Carolina. The county communications department was like, we can't tell people we need help. We can't tell people we need donations. And we were like, seriously? Here's a news flash. You need help and you need donations. And you're not budgeting for the care of the animals, so you better go to your community and they're gonna embrace you and help you. And they went kicking and screaming. And that's what they did. They went to their community and they started saying, we need towels, we need beds, we need these, whatever they needed. And they came back to us, I don't know, maybe the next year, they're like, wow, it's amazing. There's so many people in our community that care. And we were like, yeah, we know. That's why we were telling you. Ask for the help. Tell people what you need, and they'll help you. They'll come alongside you. So what happened, and what an amazing opportunity we have today with this virtual connection we have to people at our fingertips with social media. There was a shelter in Idaho where they were a private shelter. They had a waiting list for owner surrenders, and that could be weeks till they got into the shelter. So everybody's just sitting around, all these people, they still have their pets, but they're waiting to surrender them. And the director thought, isn't there some way we can intervene and help those pet owners and pets, in the meantime? So she said, hey, all you people online, send us an application, tell us about your pet, video picture. We'll put it online and we'll market that as an avenue for adoption. And that's what they did. And it's called hometohome.org. And we're going to introduce Annette to this organization. Maddie gave them a grant to help other shelters do the same thing. And the beauty of it is a little different. Same concept with Adopt a Pet Rehome, but Home to Home is your baby. It's tailored and branded for your shelter and your community. So again, we talk to the municipalities about it, not because they're doing it, but because we want them to know this is another way that we want to help animals without that intake bias and bringing them to the shelter. I don't like this name, but this is the name we call it now. We love to have 17 names for one program. We're not returning cats to a field. This means that we're talking about a friendly or a feral cat. It's just an outside cat, so it's a community cat. This could be a totally outside cat. It could be a cat that goes in and out, and it's friendly. There is no such thing as a stray cat. All you cat people know that cats are smarter than people. And they know where tuna is served on Monday, and where French fries are served on Wednesday, and where the kibble is served on Friday, and they have 5 homes, not just your home. So make no mistake, you are not their only, you're not their only food source. They know exactly where they are. So why did we tell people, if you see a cat outside, they must be lost? Take them to a shelter so their owner will find them. Why would we say that? Well, we had no data, right? When we started saying that, and then it just took a life of its own. So cats are in fact not lost. They, and especially those friendlies, shelters tend to take them in and say, oh, I'm going to find them a home because we didn't reunite them with their owners. We could have told you that because the national trend is less than 3% reunification of shelter cats. What a scandalous, wasteful program. And I don't care if we're talking about cats or a literacy program or any kind of social program. Why is it acceptable in animal welfare to have a 97% failure rate? Why is that? I hope it's not acceptable in any other sector, but that's what's acceptable to animal welfare. So what we're saying is, they don't need you, number one. They're 12 pounds. They are, what we need to do is sterilize them, ear tip them, rabies vaccinate them, and put them right back where they were already cared for, because they are reproducing, and we do want them to stop doing that, because that's when everybody gets in trouble. So why do we take a cat and that already is being cared for. We know that because they're 12 pounds with a healthy body coat, and put them in our adoption program to find them another home. So we're wasting precious resources in ways that we could have done it where all the cats go home. So what happens in the community is awesome. So the health department should love this, because we know this is happening everywhere. All the TNR and shelter new to return, return to field, this is happening in every single community, everywhere in the United States, in cold weather and warm weather. And yet the CDC reports, and the 2016 report as well, the incidence of rabies in cats is going down. So which makes total sense, right? So if I helped my neighbor at those first two, there's this many cats. If I don't help my neighbor, there's this many cats and going up, and nobody's vaccinated against rabies, but these two are vaccinated, right? So now I have immunity that I didn't have before, at least with that one vaccine, which is far better than what I have here with an exponential number of cats, none of which are vaccinated against rabies. We're talking about the cats that are coming in here. It was 1 or 2 at a time, but typically 1, because we think they're lost, or maybe I don't want them on my property, they're bothering me for some reason. So this actually is to prevent colonies. We want to prevent, certainly stabilize, but we want to prevent colonies from happening. But we often trigger when we talk about this subject to colonies, right? Because that's where everybody gets into trouble. But the majority of these cats are entering our shelters as 1 or 2. So there is, I think we said 900, I think, go back. You do this program, Cameron, what is it? I think about 900 cats or so go back. Right. So now, so it's not really a far stretch. It's just the remainder of them need to go back so that we reunite them all with their families. Now we have less cats outside. We have less wildlife impacted. The other thing that's counterintuitive, I was a public shelter director. I can promise you, when Cameron started this program in Jacksonville, one of the first in the country in 2007, I thought they were nuts. I said, this can't work in my community. Everybody's going to complain. There's no way. But guess what happens? Every single community, without fail, a drastic decrease in complaints against cats, and some even eliminated. So Cameron started this program, took over 25,000 cats through this program in Jacksonville alone, and her first year, 5,400 cats, okay? She was at that spay-neuter clinic, and the public shelter said, yeah, you guys can do it, but we're not taking all these complaints, so we're gonna give Cameron's cell phone, right? So Cameron was like, okay. She was sweating bullets, weren't you, Cameron?
I was.
So Cameron, tell the people how many complaint calls you got out of 5,400 cats.
Less than 10.
Less than 10. And what Cameron will tell you, out of that 10, the guy who called because he was really mad that people were dropping off male intact cats at his house. And Cameron's like, I didn't even put intact, like, I'm the only one that puts intact cats in my car. Like, who's driving these cats to this guy's house? What the heck's happening? So what do you think was happening at his house? So you think he was letting his female cat outside? Okay. So what did Cameron do? She went and trapped this, the 10 male intact cats and the 1 female, right? Problem solved, right? So these literally were the calls. So it's so amazing to have all these testimonials to say this happens everywhere, every time. We just need to help people, right? Even the people that complained, I don't want these cats back, I don't want them on my property, right? Well, listen, I don't want anybody spraying on my house either, and I love cats, but I still don't want them spraying on my house. People just want help. They want resolution to their problem. When we sterilize them, when we help people at the 2, then we have a much better chance, right, of being good neighbors and making sure that those cats aren't bothering their neighbors. What happens at the shelter is, for me personally, my dream come true. 30 years ago, I saw a lot of empty cages because the animals were euthanized. And now we have empty cages because they're all saved. I dreamt about that in my lifetime, but boy, I didn't think it was going to happen. I know I was working towards it, but dramatic decreases in shelter intake, and then whoever does come in the shelter, less competition. When we went back to Indianapolis, there was a cat, that cat had to be 25 years old. I mean, hyperthyroid and all, and he got adopted. He was one of 3 cats in adoption, right? So all those cats that used to be our first tier euthanasia, now are getting adopted. You don't like cats? Perfect. You should support community cat programs because dogs get better service. Now we have more time to do safety net to keep them in their homes, to help place them in a home. Once they enter the shelter, now we have more time to help dogs and do play groups and provide enrichment, right? So dogs greatly benefit from this as well. Eliminates euthanasia, and ACC&D is actually coming out with some really nice surveys that show that it's cheaper to do this return, to put the cats back, right? They come in day 1 instead of bringing them into the shelter. Day 2 they get sterilized. Day 3 they get put back. That is always cheaper than entering a shelter and whatever other outcome, whether it's adoption, transfer, or euthanasia. And so now we're talking about resource allocation effectively. Now we're talking about problem solving, and guess what? Those complainants that were every single year in kitten season, they were so angry and bringing all these cats in, you never see them again, and they become the biggest advocates because now you solve their problems and they see it work. Amazing. So look what happened in Waco, Texas, and this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about decreasing shelter intake. Are you kidding me? This is unbelievable. I can promise you at my shelter, my shelter intake went this way in the years that I was there, but these are incredibly dramatic decreases. Remember, the green is live outcome and the blue is euthanasia. So eliminating euthanasia very, very quickly when you do these programs right. This really is Nashville, Tennessee, but the reason I put this in here is for the trends. Decreasing intake, increasing live outcome, and then we'll see, maybe this is their maintenance, right? Maybe this is going to be their numbers in terms of their intake for a community that size. I love the Greenville story. This is when Cameron and I started there. We said, hey, you should do this community cat thing. They have a spay-neuter clinic in their parking lot, and we said, and how about this? How about asking those good Samaritans if they could not only take the cat across the parking lot to the spay-neuter clinic, but the day after surgery, have the Good Samaritan pick them up and put them back. And they were like, oh yeah, nobody will ever do that. Guess what? 1,500 cats that first year, 750 people said yes. Decrease the workload of the staff, right? And volunteers to have to put cats back. So if you don't ask, people aren't going to do it for sure. The most important message here, 2,000 less cats in the shelter, 2,000 less cats euthanized, budget neutral. This was budget neutral. And this is the kind of data that we now have emerging that we can share with our elected officials and civic leaders to say, this is what makes fiscal sense. If you're not doing this for a variety of reasons, you're wasting resources, and it's also a public health issue. But again, the targeted TNR, where are those cats coming from? So this shelter, we need to make sure any spay-neuter of community cats, the TNR part of it is extremely targeted so that we stop the flow of cats into the shelter from those areas. And there is nothing that reduces shelter intake, eliminates euthanasia, like this combination. Period. End of story. Come on, look at this. Closing hands, so cute. Just another reminder for you that that's really what we want, right? To keep them out of the shelter. So everything we've talked about is about being proactive, keeping them out of the shelter. This next part is just now, once they come into the shelter, what's happening. If they enter this door, this should be moment one. How am I going to get you back to your owner? How am I going to find you a home as quickly as possible? I'm going to put you back to your home if you're a community cat. How is this going to happen as quickly as possible? Because staying in a shelter has negative consequences, right? The longer they stay in the shelter, but just entering the shelter is scary. It smells weird. They don't know if there's strangers walking around. They don't like dogs. They don't like cats. It's scary. You're at risk of overcrowding, risk of disease, right? So then you're using your resources in a reactive way that we know is not the most efficient way. So we do basic care, vaccinating and deworming on intake, and this is important conversations with your municipalities who are holding animals off-site. This is important for all of them to do and know. And feeding twice a day, we see a lot of shelters feeding once a day. And I know, and I'm not even a big person, if I don't eat 6 times a day, I get really cranky. So I would never feed my shelter pets once a day. Everybody needs to think about how they feel. The dogs and cats feel the same, right? So they need to eat more frequently than once a day. And then of course, the shortest length of stay to live outcome while they're here, the kennel enrichment and positive interactions, all of those things. We love your outside play yards, they're amazing. And then of course, our return to owners are the ACOs in these variety of municipalities. Are they trying to reunite in the field, or are they taking them into the shelter or driving them here right away? What kind of lost and found outreach is there? A lot of places now have lost and found Facebook pages. Do y'all have? And is there only one Facebook page? There's multiple. Yeah, that's another problem, right? Like how many lost and found pages?
There's a lot.
There's about 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes it hard for people, right? It's like having 5 shelters, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe everybody can get together and have sort of one place where people can look when they do lose their dogs, right? Because cats we shouldn't be holding for a stray hold, and we should be putting them right back. We're so happy that the Humane Society now allows the public to see animals on stray holds, because remember, at this shelter and every other one, the return to owner rate is about 20% for dogs. That means most of the time when a stray dog comes into the shelter, I'm going to have to find him a different home. So I need to be advocating for him or her the moment they come into the shelter. So this is a reminder about resources. So some people say, well, that's all fine and good, but we don't have the money for that. We don't have the staff for that. We don't have this. So we think about what we don't have. We come from this position of scarcity where we need to be thinking about our pie and what we have and using it more strategically. I'm showing you this video because this is done by a shelter manager who is probably about 22 years old, didn't know nothing about nothing in animal welfare, and was put in this position. It's in a very teeny tiny rural county in Kentucky. I do a lot of work in Kentucky, can you tell? In Kentucky, and the building is falling apart. Literally, but you walk through the shelter like this because there's buckets because the ceiling is leaking, the rain is coming in. And this is what Zach does with all of the stray dogs. Oh, hold on a second. Just music. Can you hear it? Oh. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it's set to really pretty music. But how amazing, right? So now we don't have an excuse to say, oh, I don't have the resources. We absolutely have so many things and resources and ways that we can accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish. And I was so proud of Zach for that. But it's just a reminder to try not to think always triggered to the scarcity and what we don't have, and use what we have. Adoptions, adopters, that's another big one. We don't have enough adopters here. nobody will adopt. We do more, we have to send them to rescue because we don't have good adopters here. So we hear that a lot. And this is an area that is definitely more of an issue with private organizations, more so than public, but still an issue for the entire system of animal welfare. So Best Friends actually did a study, I think this was 2018, that showed over 70% of the people that went to breeders and pet stores to buy pets had already been to a shelter or rescue partner, and it was too cumbersome, it was too invasive, too difficult. Or like my vet school classmate friends, who are two of the best vets on the planet, got denied. So there's no scarcity of adopters. We're just putting up all, and I'm saying this as a general statement, not saying that of the Humane Society. I'm saying in general, we are putting up lots of barriers. Again, think about the funnel, right? So, and really important message to realize that and then we judge those. I know I do. I judge those people because they went and purchased a pet, or or went to a pet store when I wanted them to go to a shelter. So we need to get out of our own way. And this is called open adoptions. And I encourage you all to read Adopters Welcome by the Humane Society of the United States. If you haven't read it yet, it is a must read. Like I said, I've been doing this a long time. When I read this in 2015, holy cow, was I humbled. Page after page, I was like, oh, I was wrong about that. Oh, thought I had to charge a high adoption fee to make sure this was going to be a good pet owner. Wrong, not correlated. Then I thought, yeah, that's kind of true, right? So if I spent $5,000 on a dog and I found a dog on the street, a year later, you actually think I would look at my $5,000 dog and be like, you know, I really do love you more because I paid $5,000. Of course I'm not going to do that, right? So why would we think there's a correlation, right? So I encourage you, please, read Adopters Welcome. One thing we have to remember is, again, in our microcosm, especially on our Facebook feeds, as animal welfare advocates, we see the worst of the worst, do we not? Our animal control officers are bringing in victims of abuse, neglect, abandonment. That's our world, but we have to remember that's a very small part of what's happening globally. So in the United States, this is from the Adopters Welcome, 144 million family pets, 6 to 8 million going into shelters, and a very minute fraction of that victims of cruelty and neglect and abandonment. So we shouldn't focus on when somebody comes to adopt from us, you might be your suspect of being that bad person. More people are good than not good. We have to remember that in our microcosm. This means I want to make the right match. I want to make sure this is the pet that's best for you, your family, your life situation, etc., etc. I'm going to set you up for success. I'm going to tell you what to expect. And most importantly, I'm going to be there on the other side. So day 1, 2, 3, I want to make sure I call you. How's it going? What's doing with the introduction to your other pet? What have you, right? Be that support system. And then this goes along with low and fee waived adoptions, right? I thought the opposite, but low and fee waived adoptions are actually correlated with lower lengths of stay. And what we call on our private shelters to do that say, oh, well, we have to recoup the money. Well, you're not here to recoup money. You're not here to make money. You're here to save animals. And so your responsibility is to make money in ways other than an adoption, because we know high adoption fees correlate to long lengths of stay. And then, of course, our foster programs and getting animals, maybe it could be even adults who are not doing well in the shelter. It's just a really challenging for some of the dogs and cats. So putting them in foster care and then empowering our fosters to be ambassadors for those animals and have them find them permanent homes. So who's more obsessed than the foster parents, right? To find them permanent placement, and we want them again to be part of this open adoption philosophy, so that this is a well-oiled machine to life outcomes. So this is just a quick stop till we find permanent placement. And then of course, our transfer partnerships, whether that's rescue groups, transports to other shelters where perhaps they are doing have higher adoption rates or what have you. But we don't believe that shelters should charge rescue groups for transfer, because we look at them as a life outcome opportunity, and getting them out of the shelter quickly saves on our cost of care, right? So again, it's just about looking at how we're operating a little bit differently. And I want Cameron to come up here too, because I'm sure you're going to have questions that Cameron can ask, but we will let it know when the playbook is out, and hopefully it'll be all over your social media, right? And so that everybody can get a copy. So we are happy to answer any of your questions about anything I talked about, any concerns.
I think they're frozen.
Oh, it's cold now.
So you've shown us a lot of shelters that have really positive outcomes.
Yes.
What is the more average? I mean, what is, I know it's going to vary, you know, but obviously there are some that are more successful than others, even with these best practices. So what is a realistic expectation?
That's the realistic expectation, honestly. And because it does work that quickly, especially with the cats, it really is that quick. And we were in Dayton in November, so for years they had been less than 50% live outcome. We were there in November. In January they were over 90%. So it truly is, I mean, this is our standard. And I had somebody ask something similar. They said, did you ever go somewhere and it didn't work?
Yeah.
And we said, no, when you implement these pillars of best practices, it works everywhere and often exceeds our expectations. If there weren't changes in the numbers, no, then they didn't implement the recommendations the way that we know that they can work. So absolutely, it can be this dramatic for sure.
And remember, all of those
Yeah.
shelters that were examples started out really low, right? So
Yeah.
they weren't super successful in the
They
beginning.
weren't like,
Right.
oh, 85% to 90.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good.
Listen, no one is more humble than me, because I remember watching my live outcome percentage-wise, and yay, we increased 3%. Literally, we celebrated 3%. So for these numbers, I mean, I'm like, holy cow! Like we're just like, oh my gosh, they listened to us and it worked. So after over 100 assessments and working with these communities, yes, we can promise you and guarantee it, absolutely. And we can tell you if it's not, then there's a glitch. There's something in the system that's off that we need to help you with. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious about your connection to our shelter. So, and like this is the first I've heard of any of this. So like you said, you did an assessment, is that right?
Yes.
Did you see where our numbers are? Is that what is happening? Or?
Yeah, so so the University of Florida is part of the Million Cat Challenge, and so we look at numbers nationally, and we had 10 pro bono assessments that we offered, and so we based it on numbers. And so in 2018 there was about 65%, I want to say, for 2018 it was about 65 or so %. So based on those cats, that's why we awarded the assessment to the Humane Society of Yuma. And we got here on Monday. We did a lot of research before we came, and so we are here this week doing the assessment and learning about all these different programs that are in place. There's amazing, lots of great things going on, but we're here, and you guys are light years ahead of so many other shelters. So we're here, and your live outcome this year in 2019 for cats is much better, but we're here to take you to the next level.
I'm assuming cats and dogs you're referring to, but what does the volunteer or Joe Public do? How do we get where we want to go? What is our job?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's lots of opportunities. Like, for example, there's people that you know or are linked with that need help with their pet. This is about creating resources in our communities that could, maybe it's crisis foster care. So there's so many ways that volunteers can help, either with time, posting what about the video, or even somebody that can't come to the shelter and volunteer. Gosh, somebody from the shelter can send them those pictures and they can post that. Organizing the safety net program where we all come together, all the organizations in the area, and say, okay, who's doing what already? How can we capitalize on this? Everybody understands, and if the net decides and your board decides, yeah, we're going to do this home to home, which we think is such a great idea, get together with everybody and say, hey, this is what's happening. Advocate for people if they do want to adopt, go to home. So everything that I talked about, you have and can have any piece of that, be part of that solution. Maybe it's giving money for spay neuter, or helping somebody to spay neuter their pet, or doing a community program in underserved areas. So there's lots of ways you can. Volunteering at the shelter, right? Helping people adopt, making the right match. So all those different ways, really the sky's the limit.
So you mentioned like follow up after somebody adopts, like supporting the customer.
Yes.
How would you do that without adding employees, or if you already have a full staff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's where the whole idea of partnership and collaboration comes in. So that could be a volunteer job. That could be scripts and things we have, okay, and then perhaps there are things that maybe a staff person needs to address, then that gets passed on to a staff person. But that's an example of something that could be all volunteer driven. And that's the beauty of the sheltering and the public-private partnerships. And we know shelters that, let's face it, animal sheltering is never the number one, right, for municipalities. So we see budgets slashed and slashed, and that means staff slashed and slashed. Why are those organizations over 90% and doing amazing work? Because of the community of volunteers. So it doesn't always have to be staff doing everything or volunteers doing everything. It can be a combination. Anybody else?
Do you come back after a year or so and reassess how?
That's such a great question. So when we started in 2013, I always wanted to go, we were like, we need to go back quarterly or every 6 months or annually. We never had the budget to do that, and I'm glad we didn't, because then I wouldn't have known to be impacted. Everything that you see, that success that happens year after year, and these numbers, by the way, continue to get better every year. We helped virtually. So that could have been emails, presentations online, networking for, oh wait, this shelter had this exact problem, the board president had an issue. Let me introduce you to the board president in this shelter. We do a lot of networking, so we never had to go back. But this, what I failed to mention with the assessment is we're not here just this week and like, see you later, good luck. We're doing that for you all. This is a year-long program that we're going to do the same thing. Yeah, and you know what? New things happen, right? So there's new apps. There's new home-to-home just came out, right? So we get an inside scoop on a grant or something. Grantors look to us. We've helped organizations get over, I don't know now, $3-4 million in grants. So we are important links to money too. So if something comes out, we're like, hey, make sure you apply for this. This is coming out. This is good. Yeah. That's a great question, though. Thank you for asking that.
No.
Hi.
I'm just a citizen, and
We're so happy you're here. Perfect.
And I advocate, and my question is, I love the fact that it's a paradigm shift in thought and thinking, and I appreciate that. And I love the fact that you're saying that we need to stop coming from scarcity. And you had me, and then I fell off.
Okay.
And my question is, there are certain areas in our community that not only is it low income, but they do not know how to care for animals properly. And this is something that is constant, and there's severe neglect and abuse, and it's not ever addressed by whoever is responsible in doing so.
Right.
And so, and that's why I have so many pets, and I can't do it anymore because my health is deteriorating, and I live on a big city. So what do you do for these areas if they go in and do the spaying and neuter and vaccinations?
Right. Right. Great question, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. And you know, when I talk about scarcity, I think I'm talking about our movement and thinking about what we're doing. However, money is needed for targeted spay neuter, right? So we will always need money to assess people on fixed income with not just spay neuter but medical. And so two things. Between one thing that I talked about was that community-minded enforcement. So those officers are going into those underserved areas that you're talking about and helping them. No, I'm saying this is a recommendation. Oh. Yeah, right. So that's one thing, and it's right. And it's a pet. It's called Pets for Life, which is a Humane Society of the United States program, which is exactly that: going into underserved areas and helping people where they are, keep their pets, seeing what they need. And again, it's all about networking resources, in-kind help for them, whatever that might mean. So that enforcement, community-minded enforcement piece, the safety net piece. So if people say, oh, well, I need to surrender my pet, or like you, I can't care for them anymore, maybe my health. Well, okay, wait a second, let's help you. Don't leave them at the shelter. Let's get them on home to home, or hey, can we foster them temporarily, or what have you. So these are all ways that we want to address the population of people that need it and pets that need it most. Yeah, for sure. Do you want to add anything?
I'm just thinking, so a lot of times in animal welfare we are reactive instead of proactive. So when we free up our time by not doing things that are not part of our mission, and we are able to get out there and knock on doors and help people in those communities, they do respond. Right now we maybe the only action they're getting is when animal control shows up on their door and wants to, take their pets because they're not being cared for properly. But instead, if we said, can we show you the way? Can we give you whatever you need and help you and work with you? I mean, that it really does. The reason we're seeing success is because people then do, they're like, thank you, I didn't know that. And so then they want to do the right thing. Because most people really do love their animals. Every town that we've been here to, that's the one thing even the animal enforcement officers will say is like, our community loves its animals, even if they have no money, even if they can't afford, the finest vet care or whatever it is they need. Like, they love their animals. So, and I think there is a small portion of people that are not doing the right thing and probably shouldn't have pets. But again, I think that's going to be the minority and not the majority of your community.
Anybody else?
I know you mentioned that at one point you'd see, I forget if this was a specific shelter or not, but you would see like 3 cats, and they were like the old seniors that in the past would have been the first to go. These are the ones that are available now because everybody else has been like returned to.
And they're not all, right? So you have a lot of healthy ones too, but yeah.
So say a stray cat comes in, clear, it's healthy, it's friendly, you would just return that one field, and then like the cats to be put on the adoption board, would they be like owner turn-ins that were kept inside?
Correct.
Like kittens that were raised in foster care, stuff like that?
Correct. Remember, when we don't know the answer to something, we as humans tend to make it up, right? So we're assigning this cat the label of stray because, like, I'm a good Samaritan, I'm walking down the street, I see a friendly cat. I don't know who owns it. I'm not even gonna try to find it. I'm just gonna pick him up and bring him to the shelter, right? And I'm gonna call him stray. Meanwhile, the cat's like, I lived in this brown house right here. Like, why did you steal me out of my yard? And so, again, right, we need to just sterilize and put that cat back because he wasn't lost. And what I found when I returned a lot of those cats is that people would say, like, oh my God, that's Bucky, and I've taken care of him for 4 years, and we thought he disappeared forever, right? And it was like, oh, your neighbor actually stole him. Brought him to the shelter to save his life. But yes, what you would have in the shelter is those owner surrenders that you cannot help outside of the shelter, or maybe animals that were left behind in an eviction, or when someone moves or something. But a lot of communities are seeing this cat scarcity. So in my town, and I do cat adoptions because I had nothing else to do with my spare time, I can no longer find cats in my community to put in my adoption centers. And so I go to all my neighboring counties and they're like, we don't have any cats for you either, because everybody's doing proactive programs. And so then I have to, I'll drive 5 hours away to go pick up cats, you know? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such hard work. But the thing is that the more people are doing these proactive programs, even you are gonna see it, right? So Pima County, they're seeing it too. And it's just like, it happens everywhere.
And it's funny because when you are so overwhelmed with cats coming into your shelter, that we have a testimonial from Pima, and it was actually best friends that went into Pima and recommended the community cat programs, and they did it. And so the person Karen interviewed was saying, yeah, so best friends came in and said that we weren't having any cats in our shelter, and we thought they were crazy. And then she goes, if you look behind me, these are all empty cages. Right? That's what happens. And it's shocking, right? Because this has never happened to us before. We have just allowed everybody to flow into the shelter and clog this system with, and especially with cats who have, you know, didn't need our intervention except for the spay-neuter. Yeah.
I know you have a lot of cats that people let out at night, and you know somebody picks them up and they come in as a stray, and you just want to spay and neuter them and put them back where you found them. But how can you tell when an animal comes in, okay, that maybe got out for the first time, maybe he's never been out before, okay, gets out, somebody picks him up, brings him on in here, you just spay and neuter them and put them back in the same situation, and they have no way of taking care of themselves in that situation. How can you make a determination when you're examining that cat? What I do when I look at them, I look at their paws. If their paws are super pink and haven't been running around outside for a long time, you know that cat's pretty much an inside cat all the time. And they have gotten out once, can't find where they live because they've never been out there before.
They do though. They have GPS. They totally know how to find their way home. And the thing is that studies again will show cats are 13 times more likely to find their way home from the street than they are from the shelter. Because remember, less than 1% of the time in this shelter do owners find their cats here, right? Because they just don't come. So when we take them back home to their neighborhood, they do find their way home. And we have those same concerns, right? Like, how do I know? Because I don't know. And so then I'm gonna always think of the negative stuff that can happen. But I can promise you, people, when studies are done, like they will tell you, like, oh, you know, my cat was gone for 2 days, and then he showed back up, and his belly was shaved, and oh, he's a she, and now she's spayed. You know, they do, and I can promise you, even cats that have never been outside, they just have this like internal tracking, and they know how to get home, and they are more likely.
Yeah,
to
for
be home.
Sure. So remember, what you're thinking about is that yes, that could happen, but it is very much not the norm, because the norm in our society is about half of cat owners allow their cats in and out. So that's an exception that could happen, and let's just make it up. Happens 1 in 500 times. That means because I'm worried about that one exception, I'm going to now have a stray hold for cats that I know fails 97% of the time. So like Cameron was saying, putting them back there is absolutely better, yes, even if they did just get out, which is again would be a very unusual situation, but he's gonna get home, or the neighbor's gonna find him and say, hey, that's my neighbor's cat. We promise you. We promise you. I thought this program was insane, right? And look at me now, I'm the preacher.
So I have one comment to that, because I know in the earlier comment about does this work everywhere, and so I came over here from Philadelphia, which has the reputation of being the largest forest city in the U.S., so it's in the top 5 cities, and it's, you know, the animal control budget did shrink and stay there for the last, 7 years. They did this program, they've seen really fantastic results, and it gave us so much more ability to help those cats that needed help. So we still do get some cats, so that owned cat who maybe was left behind comes to you the first time around, maybe they're actually still in really great shape, so you can see now returning to the field. If that cat doesn't get home, your community will bring it back to you, and you'll know then, like you'll see a few signs that it didn't need to be outside. It's that 1 in 500, who needs to not be outside. You have the resources then to make sure that cat's going in the right place, and you can help that cat and rehome it then. And that was one of the things that really helped our community as well, is just like, when they make your way to you once, and they're fine, you have every indication to say that actually you're trying to go back where you came from. You have your best chance of going home if you get back where you came from. But then if you keep all of those cats, then you end up actually just harming more cats because you don't have the resources even for perfectly healthy cats, right? Who stagnate and are at risk in the shelter. So part of it is that there's still that relationship with the community. So if you do put a cat back, and that wasn't the best thing for it, there's more resources overall to help that cat again, and they do find their way back.
How do you apply this program to kittens season?
To returning, do you return kittens or not return
We
kittens?
get 50 kittens a day in the shelters, and a lot of them don't have mamas with them. How do you apply this?
So, and the reason is because there's not enough targeted spay-neuter in those areas, right? So that's the first goal, right?
Proactive.
It's proactive, which can be manipulated within the current budget to target those areas. And so what we see now is instead of kitten season in March, April, now kitten season is not till June, July. And kitten season means we get 5 kittens a day instead of that 50. So if the kittens come in and they're feral, they're old enough for surgery, we do recommend putting them back because you're not going to be able to tame them, if you will, and they're a good body weight, etc. And then for the kittens that are underage, that are not feral, they would go into foster care, and then you may keep some for your adoption program if you have the space or the room where they go into foster and then get adopted.
And that's when you combine it with your Good Samaritans, asking them, would you take them home and continue fostering them? Or a lot of times too, people have really good intentions and they see the little baby kittens and they scoop them up and run here as quick as possible, not knowing that mom is out there trying to get food so she can come back and feed them, right? And so what is the shelter going to do with underage kittens? They don't have staff sitting around with nothing to do and they can just bottle feed all day and night, right? And we don't have enough bottle feed babies. I mean, we have some really great volunteers here that will, but again, if you have, say, 5 or 10, but you are getting 50 kittens a day, there's not enough resources. Yeah. So again, we need to try to work with our community and say, Mama Cat knows best, take them back, observe them. Then if you notice that she hasn't returned for them, can you take care of them? We'll give you supplies, we'll help you with the medical later. But again, we need to work with our community. The community right now just thinks, animals, I must take them to the shelter. Take them to the shelter.
You're the shelter, so you have all the resources. That's what we train them to
How do you know that you aren't bringing in repeat offenders? I mean, like, how do we know we picked up,
the cats?
I'm gonna say feral cats.
They're
Dogs,
ear tip.
dogs pretty much know, you can tell if you've seen that dog before. But cats, like feral cats, how do you know that after they've been brought in and spayed and got their shots and you turn them back out to the neighborhood where they came from, 6 months down the road you pick up the same cat because you don't know?
They're ear tip.
You retrain the public not to pick up ear-tipped cats. Yes. An ear tip is your get out of jail free pass.
Okay.
I'm sterilized, I'm vaccinated, leave me alone.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, I was just wondering how we would tell them apart, because maybe my
Oh,
neighbor
yeah.
picked it up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mention the ear tip. Yeah.
Okay.
How about pregnant mamas when they come in? Do you hold them? Do you fix them?
We recommend spaying them because you're euthanizing for space. You have too many cats. You don't have enough fosters. That's what we're all, talking about. You don't have fosters right now. You're never going to have enough. You're never going to have enough. So we do recommend spaying them. Yes.
Yeah, and as a practical matter, those cats are knocked out. They're feral cats in traps. You have to anesthetize it anyway before you find out it's pregnant. You're not going to get your hands on it.
Yeah, or and even if it's a friendly, community. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I know, but dog, but I might pick the same cat.
Please have a cookie in the back.